The metal chair felt cold against Thexara's back. His forearms rested on the table while 3 young officers sat across from him. Their uniforms were clean and bright. Too clean. These soldiers had never seen real war. The room smelled like disinfectant and recycled air. White walls surrounded them with no windows. Only a recording device sat in the center of the table, its red light blinking. Thexara stared at it and remembered other rooms. Darker places where the air smelled like blood and smoke. "Commander Thexara," the lead officer began. Her name tag read Lieutenant Kestai. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. The Military Historical Division needs your experiences for our official records." Thexara's chitinous skin shifted from blue to gray, a sign of discomfort among his people. "Why now?" "The war ended 15 years ago. Because you fought on the front lines against humans for 3 years," another officer said. This one was younger. His voice shook slightly. "Your unit had more direct contact with human forces than any other division." The third officer leaned forward. "Command wants to understand their tactics. How they fought. What made them so effective." Thexara almost laughed. Effective. Such a clean word for what he had witnessed. "You want to know about humans?" "Yes, sir." "Everything you can tell us." Thexara looked at each young face. They reminded him of himself before the war, confident, sure that superior Zephyrian technology would crush any enemy, back when he believed the Coalition's propaganda about primitive human weapons and their small fleet. "How much do you know about the war?" he asked. Lieutenant Kestai consulted her datapad. The humans declared independence from Coalition oversight in 2387. They had inferior technology and limited resources. The war lasted 3 years. Human forces used guerrilla tactics and defensive strategies to compensate for their technological disadvantages. The war ended with the Treaty of Centauri Station. That's what the official reports say? "Yes, sir." Thexara's skin darkened to deep gray. "The reports are lies." The officers exchanged glances. The youngest one shifted in his seat. "Sir, not lies exactly, but they miss the truth." Thexara stood and walked to the wall. His reflection stared back from the metal surface. Scars covered his arms and face. Each one told a story these young soldiers would not believe. "Before I tell you anything, you need to understand something. Humans are not like us. They are not like any species in the Coalition. When we fight, we calculate odds. We consider losses. We retreat when defeat becomes certain. Humans do not." He turned back to face them. "When High Command sent me to the human colonies, they told me it would last 6 months. Maybe less. We had energy weapons. They had metal bullets. We had shields. They had armor made from steel plates. Our ships could destroy planets. Their ships looked like flying scrap metal. But you won the war," Lieutenant Kestai said carefully. "Did we?" Thexara sat back down. "Tell me, Lieutenant, if I held a knife to your throat, what would you do?" "I would surrender or try to negotiate." "Exactly. You would act logically. You would preserve your life." His forearms gestured in different directions. A human would bite the knife, even if it cut their mouth, even if they died. They would bite the knife because giving up is not in their nature. The recording device continued blinking. Thexara wondered if these words would ever leave this room. The truth about the war was classified. Only those who fought knew what really happened. "My first engagement with humans was at Kepler Station," he continued. "Our intelligence said 2,000 human defenders held an orbital mining platform. We brought 50,000 troops. It should have been over in hours." The youngest officer made a note. "But it wasn't?" "It lasted 847 days. Silence filled the room. Lieutenant Kestai checked her datapad again. "Sir, our records show Kepler Station fell in 3 days. Your records show when we finally took control of the station. They do not show how long we fought for it." Thexara's voice grew quiet. 847 days of fighting 2,000 humans who refused to surrender. 2,000 humans who turned their mining station into a fortress, who made every corridor a battleground. He closed his eyes. Even now he could hear the sound of human projectile weapons, the strange metal bullets that punched through Coalition armor like it was paper. The explosions from their improvised bombs made from mining charges. They had no energy shields, he said, no plasma weapons, no advanced medical equipment. When we cut their supply lines, they ate emergency rations. When we cut their water, they recycled their own waste. When we damaged their life support, they wore pressure suits and kept fighting. But surely they suffered heavy casualties, the third officer said. Yes. And when their soldiers died, the miners picked up weapons. When the miners died, the engineers fought. When the engineers died, the doctors and technicians grabbed guns. Thexara opened his eyes. At the end, 47 humans held the central hub. 47 out of 2,000. They had been fighting with broken bones for the last 200 days. Some had infections that should have killed them. All of them were starving. What happened when you finally broke through? Thexara remembered that moment. The blast doors opening, his soldiers rushing into the hub, weapons ready, finding humans who could barely stand but still held their guns, still refused to surrender. The ranking human officer was a woman named Commander Torres. She had been shot twice and had a broken arm. When we entered, she pointed her weapon at me and said, "You want this station? Come and take it." The young officers stared at him. Lieutenant Kesdai looked pale. She was alone, Thexara continued, surrounded by 50 of my soldiers, wounded, starving. Her weapon had maybe 6 bullets left. Any logical being would surrender. Instead, she smiled and said, "I hope you brought enough body bags." Did she fight? No. One of my soldiers knocked her unconscious before she could fire. Probably saved both our lives. Thexara's skin shifted to a lighter shade. But that smile, I still see it in my dreams. Not hatred, not fear, just absolute determination to keep fighting no matter what. The recording device blinked in the silence. Finally, Lieutenant Kesdai spoke. "Sir, if humans fought so hard, how did the Coalition win the war?" Thexara looked at her for a long moment. "Who says we won?" The Treaty of Centauri Station ended the war. Human forces agreed to Coalition terms. Read the treaty carefully, Lieutenant. Humans agreed to join the Coalition as equal partners. They kept their independence. They kept their military. They gained voting rights in the Coalition Council. He leaned forward. "Does that sound like surrender to you?" The youngest officer frowned. "But our forces occupied human space. For 6 months. Then we left. Because occupying human colonies was like trying to hold water in your hands. Every day brought new attacks, new sabotage, new resistance. The humans never stopped fighting. Not for one day." Thexara stood again. "Tomorrow, 3 human military advisors will speak to you about defensive strategies. These are the same humans who held Kepler Station, who turned defeat into victory through sheer stubborn refusal to quit." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "You want to understand humans? Remember this, they do not fight to win. They fight because stopping is not an option. And now they are our allies." The door opened with a soft hiss. "Sleep well tonight, officers. Tomorrow you learn to think like humans." As Thexara left, the 3 young officers sat in silence, staring at the blinking recording device. Outside, the stars shone peaceful and bright. But each officer now wondered what nightmares lay hidden in the official reports of the human war. The next morning brought the same sterile room and the same 3 officers. But Thexara noticed they looked tired. Dark circles under their eyes suggested little sleep. The youngest officer kept glancing at the door as if expecting humans to burst through it. "You came back," Thexara said as he settled into his chair. "We have more questions." Lieutenant Kesdai replied. Her voice was steadier today, but her hand shook slightly as she activated the recording device. "About Kepler Station?" "Yes, sir. Your report mentioned improvised explosives and hand-to-hand combat, but our technical analysis shows the station should have fallen quickly. Human weapons were primitive. Their armor was basic steel plates." Thexara's skin shifted to a darker blue. "You still think in terms of weapons and armor?" "That was our first mistake." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal fragment. Twisted and scorched, it looked like debris from an explosion. "This came from Kepler Station. Can you guess what it is?" The 3rd officer examined it. "Shrapnel from a mining charge?" "Close, it's part of a human child's toy. A small metal truck." Thexara took it back. The humans had run out of proper explosive materials by day 400. So they started using everything. Toys, kitchen equipment, medical devices. Anything that could be turned into a weapon. Lieutenant Kesdai made a note. "Desperation tactics. No adaptation." Thexara's forearms gestured emphatically. "You see desperation. I saw innovation. Every day brought new surprises. New ways to die that we had never considered." He stood and began pacing the small room. "Let me tell you about day 612. We had finally broken through the outer ring of the station. My unit was advancing through the mining section. 12 soldiers, including myself. The memory was sharp in his mind. metal corridors filled with the sound of their boots, emergency lighting casting red shadows on the walls, the smell of recycled air and something else, something organic and wrong. The corridor ahead was empty. No movement on our scanners. No heat signatures. My lieutenant wanted to charge forward, but something felt wrong. Texara stopped pacing. The air was too still. Too quiet. An ambush? The youngest officer asked. Worse, the humans had removed sections of the floor plating. Beneath us was a mining conveyor belt. Still functional, and they had filled it with broken metal, sharp rocks, and activated mining charges. He sat back down. When we reached the center of the corridor, the floor collapsed. 6 of my soldiers fell onto the conveyor belt. The belt carried them into the mining processors where the charges exploded. The officers stared at him in silence. Finally, Lieutenant Kessadai spoke. They turned the mining equipment into a weapon? The entire station was a weapon. Every system, every room, every piece of equipment had been modified to kill us. Thexara's skin turned gray. But that was not the worst part, sir. After my soldiers fell, I heard laughing. Human laughter coming from the air vents. Not cruel laughter. Not mad laughter. They sounded pleased, like engineers who had solved a difficult problem. The third officer looked confused. They were happy. They were proud. Proud that their trap worked. Proud that they had found a new way to fight us. Texara leaned forward. Do you understand? They were not fighting out of hatred or fear. They were fighting because it was a puzzle to solve. How to stop 50,000 coalition soldiers with mining equipment and scrap metal. He pulled out another object. This one was larger, roughly cylindrical and marked with human writing. This is a human emergency medical kit. Standard equipment on all their ships and stations. Can you guess how they used it at Kepler Station? The officers examined it. Medical supplies? Lieutenant Kessadai suggested. They emptied out the medical supplies and filled it with explosives. Then they left it in areas where our soldiers might find wounded humans. Texara's voice grew quiet. Coalition protocol requires us to provide medical aid to wounded enemies. The humans knew this. They booby-trapped their own medical supplies. Worse, they booby-trapped everything. Food containers, water recyclers, even their waste disposal units. He took the kit back. By day 700, my soldiers were afraid to touch anything. We brought our own food, our own water, our own equipment. But we still had to breathe their air. The youngest officer looked sick. The air was poisoned? Not poisoned. Modified. The humans had adjusted the atmospheric mix in different sections of the station. Some areas had too much oxygen. Others had too little. Some had trace amounts of industrial chemicals that made our targeting systems malfunction. Texara stood again and walked to the wall. His reflection looked back at him, scarred and tired. On day 800, we controlled 90% of the station. The humans held only the central hub and 2 connecting corridors. Our scanners showed 47 life signs. 47 humans against 3,000 coalition soldiers. Why didn't you just blast through the walls? We tried. The humans had reinforced the hub with mining equipment, huge metal beams and rock-crushing machinery. Our energy weapons barely scratched it. He turned back to face them, so we decided to wait them out. Cut their power. Cut their water. Cut their food. Wait for them to surrender. Did it work? Texara laughed, but there was no humor in it. The humans had been without regular food for 200 days. They were eating emergency rations mixed with recycled organic matter. Some of them had broken bones that had healed wrong because they had no proper medical equipment. All of them were sick. He sat down heavily. But they kept fighting. Every day they would attack our positions. Small raids. 2 or 3 humans with improvised weapons. They would hit us and disappear back into their hub. How long did this continue? Until day 847. That's when Command ordered us to use mining explosives to break through the hub walls. Texara's skin shifted to the darkest gray. It took us 6 hours to plant the charges. The humans shot at us the entire time. Even with broken weapons and almost no ammunition, they kept shooting. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air recycling system. Lieutenant Kessadai finally asked, "What happened when you broke through?" We found 47 humans in the central control room. They had built barricades from furniture and broken equipment. Some were so weak they could barely stand. Others were unconscious from blood loss or infection. Texara closed his eyes, but they were all armed. Even the unconscious ones had weapons in their hands. Did they surrender? Commander Torres, their leader, was sitting behind the main barricade. She had been shot twice in the chest and once in the leg. Her left arm was broken and infected. She was missing 2 fingers from her right hand. He opened his eyes. When we entered, she looked up at me and said, "Took you long enough." The third officer leaned forward. "What did you say?" I asked her to surrender. I told her the fight was over. She had defended her station with honor. Thexara's voice grew softer. She smiled and said, "The fight is never over. It just moves to a different room." What did she mean? I understood later. The humans at Kepler Station were not just defending a mining platform. They were teaching us a lesson, showing us that humans do not surrender ever. He stood and walked toward the door. Every coalition commander who fought there learned the same thing. You cannot defeat humans by destroying their equipment or cutting their supplies. You can only defeat humans by killing every single one of them. But you didn't kill them all. Thexara stopped at the door. No, we took them prisoner, fed them, gave them medical care, and 6 months later, when the war ended, they were released. He turned back to the officers. Commander Torres was promoted and given command of a new human battlecruiser. The same woman who held Kepler Station with mining equipment and scrap metal now commands one of the most advanced ships in the galaxy. The door opened with its soft hiss. Tomorrow I will tell you about a human medic who changed how I think about war itself. As Thexara left, the 3 officers sat staring at the metal fragment he had left on the table. A child's toy turned into a weapon by necessity and determination. Outside their window, human ships could be seen docked at the military station. Their crews working alongside coalition forces, partners now, allies. But the officers finally understood why the alliance had been necessary. Not because humans were weak, but because they were too dangerous to remain enemies. The third day brought rain against the windows of the interview room. Thexara watched the water streak down the glass as the 3 officers prepared their equipment. They moved differently now, more careful, more aware. "You look troubled," he said to Lieutenant Kestai. "We read the classified reports about Kepler Station last night," she replied. "The real reports? And?" "They were detailed." The youngest officer spoke without looking up from his datapad. "Very detailed about casualty numbers." "And methods," Thexara nodded. "Good. You are beginning to understand." He settled into his chair as the recording device activated. "Today I want to tell you about Verdania 7, a jungle world where I learned that humans fight even when they have no reason to." The 3 officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Kestai consulted her notes. "Our records show minimal human presence on Verdania 7, a few research stations." "Correct. Scientific outposts studying plant life and atmospheric conditions. Non-military personnel, civilians." Thexara's skin shifted to a lighter blue. "We expected no resistance." "But there was resistance?" "Not at first. When our ships arrived, most human researchers evacuated. Standard procedure. Smart tactical thinking." He paused. "But not all of them left." The memory of Verdania 7 came back in waves. Thick green jungle that blocked their scanners. Humid air that made breathing difficult. Strange plants that secreted chemicals harmful to coalition equipment. And somewhere in that maze of vegetation, scattered human research teams who refused to leave their work. My unit was tasked with clearing the southern continent. 12 research stations spread across 2,000 square kilometers of jungle. Thexara's 4 arms gestured to show the scale. Each station was supposed to hold 5 to 10 researchers. Easy targets, and then were they abandoned? Some were, others. He trailed off, remembering. Others had been converted into hidden supply depots for human forces. The researchers had stayed behind to support military operations. The third officer made a note. So they were combatants. That's what I thought at first. Thexara stood and began his usual pacing. Until we found Research Station 7. He could still smell the jungle, sweet and rotten at the same time, the sound of his soldiers moving through thick vegetation, the constant buzz of insects and the calls of alien birds, and underneath it all the quiet hum of human technology. The station looked abandoned from the outside. No power signatures, no movement on our scanners, but my lieutenant detected trace amounts of medical chemicals in the air. Thexara stopped pacing. Someone was performing surgery. Human soldiers? We thought so. My squad surrounded the building and prepared to assault. Standard tactical approach, overwhelming force against a small enemy position. He sat back down. But when we breached the entrance, we found something unexpected. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the window. Thexara stared at the table, remembering that moment of confusion when everything he thought he knew about war changed. The main laboratory had been converted into a medical facility. Surgical equipment made from research tools, operating tables built from lab benches, and in the center of it all, a human woman working on a wounded coalition soldier. Lieutenant Kestai looked confused. A coalition soldier? Private Zentak of the 3rd Assault Division. He had been missing for 18 days. We assumed he was dead. Thexara's voice grew quiet. But this human medic had found him with massive internal injuries and brought him to her makeshift hospital. Why would she treat an enemy soldier? That's what I asked her. The woman looked up from her surgery and said, because he was bleeding. Thexara's skin shifted to gray, as if that explained everything. He stood again and walked to the window. The rain was getting heavier. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobotanist specializing in medical applications of alien plant life. She had been on Verdania 7 for 2 years studying local flora. Where were the other researchers? Evacuated when the war started. But Dr. Chen had refused to leave. She said her research was too important. Thexara turned back to face them. What she didn't tell the evacuation ships was that she had been finding wounded soldiers from both sides and bringing them to her station. The youngest officer looked up from his datapad. Both sides? 23 coalition soldiers, 8 humans, all wounded, all receiving medical care from a single human civilian who had no combat training and limited supplies. Thexara sat down heavily. When we entered, she was performing surgery on Private Zentak with tools she had built from laboratory equipment. What kind of surgery? Removing shrapnel from his internal organs. Repairing damage to his digestive system. Complex procedures that should have required a full medical team and proper surgical equipment. He paused. She was doing it alone with improvised tools while wounded herself. Lieutenant Kessadai leaned forward. She was wounded? Shrapnel in her left leg from an artillery strike 3 days earlier. The wound was infected and she was running a fever. She should have been on bed rest. Thexara's voice grew softer. Instead, she was saving lives. The memory was crystal clear. Dr. Chen's hands moving with precise skill despite exhaustion and pain. Her quiet voice giving instructions to wounded soldiers who were helping her treat other wounded soldiers. Coalition and human forces working together because a civilian medic had told them to. She looked up at me when we entered. Thexara continued. Blood on her surgical gown. Sweat on her forehead from fever and exertion. And she said, "Are you here to help or should I add you to the waiting list?" "What did you do?" "I helped." The admission still surprised him. My squad medic took over the surgery while Dr. Chen collapsed from exhaustion. We spent the next 6 hours treating wounded soldiers instead of fighting a war. The third officer looked confused. Your orders were to clear the research station. My orders were to eliminate enemy resistance. But there was no resistance. Only a sick human woman trying to save lives. Thexara's skin shifted through several colors. She had converted her entire research station into a hospital. Sleeping quarters for patients. A laboratory turned into a pharmacy, where she manufactured medicine from local plants. A greenhouse converted into a recovery ward. How long had she been doing this? 18 days. Since the fighting started in that sector, every day she would search the jungle for wounded soldiers. Human or coalition, it didn't matter. She brought them back, treated their injuries, and sent them home when they recovered. Lieutenant Kestai made several notes. Didn't the soldiers try to escape? Resume fighting? Some did, but most... Thexara paused, remembering faces. Most stayed to help. Coalition soldiers helping human soldiers. Human soldiers helping coalition soldiers. All because one unarmed civilian had decided that saving lives was more important than choosing sides. What happened to her? When she recovered from her fever, I asked her why she stayed. Why she risked her life for enemy soldiers. Thexara's voice grew very quiet. She said, "They're not enemy soldiers when they're bleeding. They're just people who need help." The room fell silent. Rain continued to strike the window in steady rhythm. Finally, the youngest officer spoke. "Did you arrest her?" "I tried to. My orders were clear. Civilian or not, she was providing aid to enemy forces." Thexara stood and walked back to the window. But when I told her she was under arrest, she pointed to the recovery ward where 15 coalition soldiers were healing from injuries that should have killed them. What did she say? She said, "Fine, arrest me. But who's going to take care of your soldiers while you're gone?" He turned back to the officers. "I realized that arresting her would mean letting my own troops die from wounds she could treat. So you left her there?" "I assigned 2 of my soldiers to guard the station." Officially, they were keeping Dr. Chen under arrest. Unofficially, they were helping her run a hospital in the middle of a war zone. Texara sat back down. For 3 weeks, Research Station 7 was neutral territory. The only place on Verdania 7 where humans and coalition forces didn't shoot at each other. Lieutenant Kestai looked up from her notes. "What ended it?" "The war moved on. Fighting shifted to other sectors. Dr. Chen had treated 43 coalition soldiers and 27 humans by the time we left." Texara's skin shifted to a lighter shade. Every single one survived. Injuries that should have been fatal became full recoveries. "Where is she now?" "Dr. Sarah Chen is the Chief Medical Officer for the Coalition Human Medical Exchange Program. She trains doctors from both species in emergency medicine and battlefield surgery." He smiled slightly. "The woman who turned a plant research station into a hospital now runs the largest medical training facility in the galaxy." The third officer looked confused. "But she was a civilian. She had no military training." "Exactly. That's what made her so dangerous." Texara's expression grew serious. Dr. Chen fought the war on her own terms. She ignored military protocol, political boundaries, and species loyalties. She simply decided that her job was to save lives and nothing was going to stop her from doing that job. He stood and walked toward the door. "You want to understand humans? Remember Dr. Chen? She had every reason to evacuate with the other researchers. She was injured, alone, and surrounded by enemy forces. Any logical being would have left. But she didn't." The 4th morning brought clear skies and nervous energy. The 3 officers arrived early, setting up their equipment with more care than before. Texara noticed they had requisitioned additional recording devices and data storage units. "Expecting something important today?" he asked as he entered. "Command has been reading our preliminary reports," Lieutenant Kestai replied. "They want detailed technical analysis of human military capabilities." Technical analysis. Texara's skin shifted to an amused blue-green. "You still think this is about technology?" He settled into his chair and looked at each officer in turn. They were different now. 3 days of stories had changed them. Their confidence was gone, replaced by wary respect and growing understanding. "Today I will tell you about the Battle of Andromeda Gate, the final major engagement of the war." Texara's voice grew somber. "The day I learned that humans can turn defeat into victory by simply refusing to accept that they have lost." The youngest officer activated the recording equipment. "Our records show a decisive coalition victory. The human fleet was destroyed. Your records are correct. The human fleet was destroyed. Every ship," Texara paused. "But we still lost the battle." Lieutenant Kestai frowned. "Sir, that doesn't make sense." "Nothing about humans makes sense until you stop thinking like a Zephyrian." He stood and began pacing. The Battle of Andromeda Gate was supposed to end the war. High Command had assembled the largest fleet in coalition history. 300 ships, including our flagship, the Eternal Victory. The memory brought back the smell of recycled ship air and the hum of massive engines. 5 kilometers of advanced technology carrying 50,000 crew members. The pride of the Zephyrian fleet, equipped with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached. The human fleet consisted of 47 ships, old vessels held together with metal welding and spare parts. Their newest ship was 20 years old by coalition standards. Texara stopped pacing. "We outnumbered them 7-1. We outgunned them 10-1. Victory was mathematically certain. But something went wrong. Everything went according to plan. For the first 6 hours, he sat back down. Our energy weapons destroyed human ships faster than they could retreat. Their projectile weapons barely scratched our armor. By hour 8, they had lost 36 ships and were down to 11 survivors. The 3rd officer made notes. Standard tactical victory. That's what Admiral Krathor thought. He opened communication channels to offer terms of surrender. Standard coalition protocol. Texara's skin darkened. The human fleet commander was Captain Maria Santos of the destroyer Indomitable, a woman in her 50s who had been fighting coalition forces for 2 years. Did she surrender? Admiral Krathor said, "Captain Santos, your fleet is destroyed. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to military law." I was on the bridge. I heard her response. Thexara's voice grew quiet. She laughed. She laughed? For 10 seconds. Then she said, "Admiral, you seem to be confused about something. My fleet isn't destroyed. We're just getting started." He stood again, agitation making his skin shift colors rapidly. At that moment, sensors detected massive power spikes from the remaining human ships. They were preparing to retreat? No, they were removing safety limiters from their engines, shutting down life support to non-essential areas, redirecting all power to weapons and propulsion. Thexara walked to the window. The humans were preparing to ram our ships. Lieutenant Kestai looked up sharply. Suicide attacks? That's what we thought. Admiral Krethor ordered evasive maneuvers and increased defensive fire. But Captain Santos had calculated something we missed. He turned back to face them. The Indomitable was not targeting our escort ships or our cruisers. She was coming straight for the eternal victory. The memory was vivid. Alarms blaring on the bridge. Officers shouting damage reports. The Indomitable growing larger on the view screen as it accelerated past maximum safe speed. Its hull glowing red from engine heat and weapons fire. The Indomitable was already damaged. Hull breaches on 3 decks. Main weapons offline. Life support failing. Thexara's skin turned gray. Any reasonable commander would have ordered evacuation. Captain Santos ordered ramming speed. How fast were they going? Too fast. Their engines were past critical overload. The ship should have broken apart from the stress. He sat back down heavily. But somehow impossibly it held together long enough to reach us. Did they ram the flagship? Yes and no. Thexara's forearms gestured in complex patterns. Captain Santos was not trying to destroy the eternal victory. She was trying to cripple it. And she had calculated exactly how to do that with a ship that was falling apart. The officers leaned forward. This was not in any official report. The Indomitable struck our port side at an angle. Not a direct impact. A precise collision that disabled our main weapon systems without breaching our core hull. Thexara's voice grew wondering. She had turned her ship into a surgical instrument. A precise tool for disabling a vessel 10 times larger. How is that possible? Captain Santos had been an engineer before the war. She understood ship design better than most builders. She knew exactly where to hit the eternal victory to cause maximum damage with minimum loss of life. He paused. Both minimum loss of coalition life and minimum loss of human life. Lieutenant Kestai looked confused. Minimum loss of human life? The impact destroyed most of the Indomitable, but Captain Santos had reinforced specific sections of the ship. Areas where her crew could survive the collision. Thexara's skin shifted to a surprised blue. Of the 400 humans aboard, 267 survived the impact. What happened to them? They boarded our ship. The simple statement hung in the air. While we were dealing with damage control and trying to restore weapons, 267 human soldiers armed with projectile weapons and improvised explosives cut their way into the eternal victory. The youngest officer stopped taking notes. They invaded your flagship? From the inside. Captain Santos had calculated the impact point to place her surviving crew directly adjacent to our weakest internal defenses. Thexara stood and walked back to the window. Within 30 minutes, humans controlled 3 decks of our ship. How did they move so fast? Because they were not trying to capture the ship. They were trying to complete their mission. He turned back. While her crew created chaos on the upper decks, Captain Santos and 20 volunteers fought their way to our main computer core. Why? To download our battle plans, fleet positions, and strategic databases. Everything needed to coordinate the final human counterattack. Thexara's skin turned the darkest gray. She had turned a suicide run into an intelligence operation. The room fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Finally, Lieutenant Kestai asked, "Did she succeed?" Captain Santos reached the computer core with 12 surviving crew members. They held the position for 47 minutes while downloading classified coalition military data. Thexara sat back down. 47 minutes against 3,000 coalition security troops. That's impossible. I was part of the security response. I saw it with my own eyes. His voice grew soft with remembered awe. 12 humans with improvised weapons holding a position against overwhelming odds. Not because they expected to win, because their mission required 47 minutes and they were going to provide 47 minutes. What happened to Captain Santos? She was captured when her ammunition ran out. wounded but alive. Thexara's skin shifted to a lighter shade. The first thing she said to me was, "Thank you for the data. This should end the war much faster." The data? Within 6 hours, human forces used the downloaded intelligence to coordinate simultaneous attacks on 17 coalition strategic positions. While we were repairing the Eternal Victory, humans were destroying supply depots, communication relays, and command centers across 3 star systems. The third officer looked up from his data pad. But the human fleet was destroyed. Yes, all 47 ships. Nearly 3,000 human naval personnel killed or captured. Thexara stood and walked toward the door. But those 3,000 people had crippled the Coalition's ability to continue the war. Within a week, High Command was negotiating for peace. Because of one ramming attack? Because of what that attack represented. Captain Santos had shown that humans could turn any defeat into a victory. Any loss into an opportunity. Any desperate situation into a strategic advantage. He paused at the door. We realized that fighting humans was like fighting the concept of surrender itself. Every time we thought we had won, they found a way to keep fighting. Lieutenant Kestai looked at her notes. Where's Captain Santos now? Admiral Santos commands the Joint Coalition human fleet stationed at Centauri Station. The same woman who rammed our flagship with a broken-down destroyer now has authority over 200 of the most advanced ships in the galaxy. Thexara's skin shifted to an amused blue-green. Last month, she sent me a message thanking me for my assistance during the Battle of Andromeda Gate. What assistance? I was the security officer who arrested her after she downloaded our military database. She said my professional courtesy during her capture made the whole operation much more pleasant. The 5th morning felt different. The officers arrived with larger data storage units and additional recording equipment. Word had spread through the military base about Thexara's interviews. Senior commanders wanted copies of everything. Busy night? Thexara asked as he watched them set up multiple recording devices. Command is very interested in your reports, Lieutenant Kestai replied carefully. Several admirals have requested full transcripts. And some of your statements contradict official war records. The youngest officer spoke without looking up. High Command wants clarification. Thexara's skin shifted to dark blue. They want me to change my story. They want accurate information, the third officer said quickly. For historical purposes. The history I have told you is accurate. The official records are propaganda. Thexara settled into his chair. Today I will tell you why the war really ended. Not the clean version in your textbooks. The truth. Lieutenant Kestai activated the recording equipment. We're ready, sir. Good, because what I tell you today will explain everything else. Thexara's voice grew serious. The Coalition did not lose the human war because of technology or tactics or strategy. We lost because we could not understand what we were fighting. Sir, every species in the Coalition fights according to logical principles. We calculate odds. We measure resources. We retreat when defeat becomes inevitable. We surrender when continuation becomes pointless. He stood and began pacing. Humans do not. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of recording equipment. Thexara stopped pacing and faced the 3 officers. Let me tell you about the real reason the war ended. Not the Battle of Andromeda Gate, not any single engagement, but the slow, terrible realization that humans could not be defeated by conventional means. What do you mean? I mean that after 3 years of fighting, Coalition forces controlled 90% of human territory. We occupied their major colonies. We destroyed their shipyards. We cut their supply lines. By every military measure, humans had lost. Thexara's skin shifted to gray, but they kept fighting. He walked to the window and stared out at the joint fleet exercises. Human and Coalition ships moving together in perfect harmony. Partners now, not enemies. High Command calculated that human resistance would collapse within 6 months of losing their main fleet. Standard military psychology. People surrender when further resistance becomes hopeless. He turned back to face them. 18 months later, human attacks were increasing. How is that possible? Because humans do not fight like other species. When we destroyed their factories, they built new ones in asteroid fields and hidden moons. When we captured their officers, civilian engineers took command. When we cut their supply lines, they learned to make weapons from mining equipment and agricultural tools. The memory brought back briefing sessions filled with increasingly desperate Coalition commanders, reports of human resistance cells appearing faster than they could be eliminated, Attacks on coalition positions that made no strategic sense but continued anyway. The Psychological Warfare Division studied human behavior patterns for 2 years. They wanted to understand what motivated continued resistance when victory was mathematically impossible. Thexara sat back down. Their conclusion was classified. Only senior command staff ever saw the real report. Lieutenant Kessadai leaned forward. What did it say? That humans do not fight to win wars. They fight to avoid losing who they are. His voice grew quiet. Every other species fights for territory, resources, political advantage. Humans fight for the right to remain human. I don't understand, neither did we. That was the problem. Thexara's forearms gestured emphatically. Coalition forces could occupy human worlds, destroy human ships, capture human leaders. But we could not make humans stop being human. And as long as humans existed, they would keep fighting. The third officer looked confused. But the war ended. They signed the Treaty of Centauri Station. Yes, but not because they surrendered. Thexara stood again, agitation making his skin shift through multiple colors. The treaty was signed because High Command realized that completely defeating humans would require killing every single human in the galaxy. The room grew very quiet. Outside, the sound of ship engines could be heard as the Joint Fleet continued its exercises. You see, humans had taught us something about ourselves, something we did not want to learn. Thexara's voice grew bitter, that the coalition was capable of genocide, that our logical civilized society could be pushed to the point of exterminating an entire species simply because they refused to surrender. Lieutenant Kessadai looked pale. Command considered that option? For 6 months. The final strategic planning sessions focused on one question. How do you defeat an enemy that will never stop fighting? He walked back to the window. The answer was simple. You kill them all, but they didn't. No. Because Admiral Vosrak asked a different question. Thexara turned back to face them. Not how to defeat humans, but what defeating humans would make us. The memory of that final command briefing was crystal clear. 50 senior officers in a sterile conference room, discussing the systematic extermination of humanity with the same calm efficiency they used for supply planning and fleet deployment. Admiral Vosrak was our most decorated commander. He had fought in 12 campaigns across 40 years. He understood war better than anyone. Thexara's skin shifted to a lighter shade, and he said something that changed everything. What? He said, if we have to become monsters to defeat humans, then humans have already won. Thexara sat back down. That ended the genocide planning, but it left us with an impossible situation. We could not defeat humans without destroying ourselves, and we could not continue the war without eventually being forced to choose genocide. The youngest officer stopped taking notes, so the coalition chose peace. The coalition chose survival. Our survival as a civilized society. Thexara's voice grew softer. The treaty negotiations lasted 4 months. Not because humans were difficult to negotiate with, but because we had to completely change our understanding of what victory meant. How so? Humans offered to join the coalition as equal partners. Full membership rights, voting representation, military cooperation. He paused. In exchange, they would stop fighting. Lieutenant Kessadai frowned. That sounds like they won. They did win, just not the way anyone expected. Thexara stood and walked toward the door. The Treaty of Centauri Station made humans equal members of the coalition government. The species that had nearly been exterminated for refusing to surrender became partners in ruling the galaxy. Why did the coalition agree to those terms? Because the alternative was a war that would destroy both sides. Humans would fight until they were extinct. The coalition would become the kind of society that exterminates entire species for political reasons. He paused at the door. Neither side could accept that outcome. The third officer looked at his data pad. Sir, there's something I don't understand. If humans are so dangerous, why form an alliance with them? Thexara's skin shifted to an amused blue-green. Because humans are equally dangerous as enemies and allies. The difference is which direction they point their determination. Meaning that humans will fight just as hard to protect coalition worlds as they fought to protect their own. The same species that held Kepler Station for 800 days will now hold coalition territory for 8,000 days if necessary. He opened the door. Human stubbornness works both ways. Is that why you're telling us these stories? I am telling you these stories because tomorrow, 3 human military advisors will teach you defensive strategies and tactical planning. You will learn to think like humans. Texara's expression grew serious. And you need to understand what that means. Sir, it means learning to fight wars that cannot be won through conventional victory. Learning to turn defeats into opportunities. Learning to continue fighting when logic says you should surrender. He stepped through the doorway, then turned back. It means becoming dangerous, Lieutenant Kessadai called after him. Commander, are you saying humans have changed the coalition military? I am saying humans have changed the coalition itself. We are no longer the same society that started the human war. Texara's skin shifted to deep blue. We have learned human determination, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat. Is that good or bad? That depends on who we fight next. He smiled slightly. But any species that attacks the coalition now will face human tactics, human determination, and human stubbornness backed by coalition resources and technology. A hybrid military doctrine? A hybrid society. The best of both civilizations. Texara stepped fully into the corridor. Sleep well, officers. Tomorrow you begin learning to think like the species that taught the galaxy how to fight wars that cannot be lost. As the door closed, the 3 officers sat in stunned silence. Around them, multiple recording devices captured their heavy breathing and the distant sound of joint military exercises. Outside the window, human and coalition ships moved in perfect synchronization, their crews working together with the seamless efficiency born from mutual respect and shared purpose. But now the officers understood the truth. This was not just an alliance between 2 species. This was the birth of something new.